On the quiet streets of Maple Hollow, where dreams once wandered freely, darkness returned with the thunder of roaring engines. An 8-year-old girl, Emma Brooks, stood alone, or so they thought. But at her side, wrapped in golden fur and undying loyalty, a forgotten warrior waited. Charlie wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, born of pain, a hero, tempered by loss. And on that day in the shadow of fear he would rise again, because sometimes the smallest hearts carry the fiercest courage, and sometimes salvation comes on 4 steady paws and a heart too big for betrayal to break. Early autumn had come to Maple Hollow with a gentleness that felt like a lullaby, the kind of season where the mornings kissed the streets with a light mist, and the maple trees blushed deep crimson and gold. Tucked into the folds of rolling hills and lazy streams, the town looked almost untouched by time, a mosaic of red brick shops, white-steepled churches, and winding lanes bordered by picket fences. The sky that morning wore a soft quilt of clouds, promising a cool, crisp day, perfect for wandering dreaming, or for a girl named Emma Brooks finding a new step toward independence. Emma Brooks, at 8 years old, was a quiet ember in a world of bright flames. Her light brown hair often fell into her face in untidy wisps, no matter how many times her mother combed it into neat plaits, and her wide slate-blue eyes carried the depth of oceans far older than herself. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when she was 4, Emma navigated the world like a traveler in a foreign land, hypersensitive to sounds, overwhelmed by crowds, yet blessed with an almost supernatural ability to spot the hidden beauty in forgotten places, where others saw weeds. Emma saw secret gardens. Where others heard noise, she heard symphonies. Her movements were deliberate, her voice seldom loud, and her heart had room only for those rare souls she could truly trust. One of those rare souls was Charlie. Charlie, the Brooks family's golden retriever, was a 4-year-old tower of sunlit fur and unwavering devotion. Weighing a solid 75 pounds, his creamy golden coat shimmered like ripe wheat in the sunlight, and his amber eyes held an old, almost knowing sadness. Before coming to live with the Brooks family, Charlie had been a therapy dog serving military veterans, grappling with trauma, a life that had sculpted him into a creature of astonishing patience and quiet strength. His past left small shadows in his behavior, startling slightly at sudden, loud noises, sleeping lightly with his head always facing the door. But with Emma he was pure gentleness. Their bond had been immediate elemental, like 2 rivers that had always been meant to meet. Tom Brooks. Emma's father was the sturdy backbone of Maple Hollow. At 45, Tom had the solid, weathered look of a man born to protect others. His frame was broad, his brown hair was cut short, and fine lines mapped his sun-toughened skin, especially around eyes that remained a steady steel gray. Even under pressure, Tom served as the sheriff of Maple Hollow, a role he carried, not with bluster, but with an unshakable quiet authority that made people feel safer just by his presence. Years on the force had given him a stoic patience and a belief in second chances, a belief born from a long-ago mistake, one he'd made early in his career that had nearly cost an innocent man his life. Since then, Tom judged people not just by the worst thing they'd done, but by the fight they showed to become better. Laura Brooks. Emma's mother was a woman of gentle curves and fierce love, a contrast of warmth and resilience. In her early 40s, Laura was average in height, her chestnut hair usually tied in a practical bun under her nurse's cap at Maple Hollow's small clinic. She had the hands of a healer, small, strong, capable, and the heart of a woman who had learned the hard way that even the brightest futures could flicker. Losing her younger brother to an overdose during the opioid crisis years ago had shaped Laura's fierce protective instincts, particularly where Emma was concerned. Her smile could light a room, but behind it lived a watchfulness, a readiness to catch her daughter when the world's chaos became too much. That morning, the Brooks family's world was still at peace. Tom sat at the worn oak kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee and scanning the local news on his battered tablet. Laura bustled near the stove, humming tunelessly, flipping pancakes onto a plate already stacked high. The kitchen smelled of syrup and butter, safe smells that wrapped the family in their ordinary miracle of togetherness. Emma perched at the corner of the table, her chin resting on her knees, pulled tightly to her chest, watching Charlie with hawk-like focus. The dog lay sprawled at her feet, tail thumping lazily against the cool hardwood, his nose twitching at the smell of breakfast, but his gaze never straying far from the small girl he had chosen as his purpose. Daddy Emma said, her voice soft but sure. "Can I go to Willow Mart today? Just me and Charlie." Tom looked up from his tablet, one eyebrow lifting. It wasn't a new request, but each time it came, it made his heart clench. Emma needed to grow. He knew that. She needed to test her wings outside their carefully constructed nest, even if the thought turned his blood to ice. The town was small, but still. Still, Laura turned from the stove, concern etched across her features. "It's only 3 blocks, she said, uncertainty dripping from every word. Tom weighed the decision carefully. Maple Hollow wasn't what it used to be. New faces, a few petty crimes, a whisper of trouble at the edges. But it wasn't the kind of place you let fear win. He glanced down at Charlie, who met his gaze with a calm, steady look that spoke of loyalty without limits. "Okay," Tom said slowly. "But you take your whistle and you stay with Charlie the whole time. Understand?" Emma nodded solemnly, slipping off her chair to fetch the bright yellow whistle from its hook near the door. Charlie rose immediately, his entire posture shifting into alertness, as if he sensed the weight of the responsibility just assigned to him. Tom watched them go, Emma's hand buried in Charlie's fur, the dog's head brushing lightly against her side, and felt both terror and pride blooming in his chest. The streets of Maple Hollow greeted Emma and Charlie with their usual sleepy charm. Mrs. Dunbar, the elderly widow with snowy hair and a penchant for floral dresses, waved from her porch. Mr. Halverson, the grizzled owner of the hardware store, tipped his cap from where he swept fallen leaves from the sidewalk. They were known here. They were loved. But as Emma rounded the corner onto Main Street, she felt a strange tightening in her chest. Charlie, ever attuned, leaned into her leg reassuringly, his ears flicking toward a low sound in the distance, a mechanical rumble that grew steadily louder. A motorcycle. Maybe more than one. Emma hesitated, clutching Charlie's fur more tightly, instinctually sensing that the misty cocoon of Maple Hollow might not be enough to keep all darkness at bay. Charlie stood rigid now, a golden statue between her and whatever was coming. His body low, his muscles coiled like springs ready to protect or to fight if he must. But in that moment, standing under the ancient maple trees with the leaves swirling around her like whispers, Emma felt something remarkable. She wasn't alone. Not truly. Not ever. As long as Charlie was there. And she stepped forward, brave and trembling, into the unknown. The early October mist clung stubbornly to the winding streets of Maple Hollow, softening the edges of the quaint town, but doing little to hide the growing unease that had settled over it. The first whispers of trouble had started in hushed conversations over diner counters and quick glances exchanged at gas stations. Maple Hollow had always been a town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to neighbors they had known for decades, but now the smiles were tighter, the greetings more cautious. A shadow had returned, and everyone could feel its chill. The Iron Vultures were back, led by Wyatt Cole. The notorious motorcycle gang had once been little more than a passing threat on the town's outskirts, their roaring engines and leather vests seen as nothing more than nuisances by most. But time and hardship had changed both the gang and the town. Now, Wyatt's men came with a sharper edge, bringing with them rumors of drug trafficking, protection rackets, and intimidation that had darkened the surrounding counties. The thought of them establishing a foothold in Maple Hollow sent a cold knot into the stomach of every honest citizen. Sheriff Tom Brooks stood on the front steps of the town hall, coffee cooling in his hand, watching as a small convoy of motorcycles rumbled past on Main Street. His jaw tightened. Wyatt Cole, once a high school legend in a neighboring town, had grown into a hardened, dangerous man. Wyatt's heavy-set frame bore the years like a badge of survival. His thick black beard streaked with silver, and his eyes hidden behind perpetually mirrored sunglasses. There was no warmth in him anymore, only a coiled violence that could erupt without warning. Tom knew the kind of decay Wyatt and his gang could bring. He had seen it before in towns, much like Maple Hollow, places that now existed only as cautionary tales whispered among officers. It wasn't just the drugs or the violence. It was the corrosion of trust, the fear that seeped into every crack until even the safest streets felt hostile after sunset. Inside the sheriff's office, the tension was just as palpable. Deputy Mason Green, sharp-eyed and wiry, flipped through a stack of incident reports with a frown etched deep between his brows. A no-nonsense man in his 30s, Mason had been raised in Maple Hollow and took every disturbance personally. His past, marked by watching his family lose everything during the economic downturn, had forged in him a hard, skeptical nature and an unrelenting work ethic. "Third report this week about prowlers near the North End," Mason said, tossing a folder onto Tom's desk. "Descriptions fit. Iron vultures. Locals are getting nervous." Tom nodded grimly. They should be. He knew that battling Wyatt wouldn't just require arrests or patrols. It would require the town itself to stand firm, and it would require the vulnerable to resist the easy lure of money and false brotherhood. The gang promised. That's why Tom's thoughts kept returning to Nate Cooper. Nate had once been Maple Hollow's golden boy, a quarterback, an honor roll student, a soldier. But war had hollowed him out, leaving behind a man who wore his pain like a second skin. At 27, Nate moved like a shadow of his former self. His broad shoulders stooped under invisible weight. His short, blonde hair kept under a battered cap as if trying to hide from the world. His green eyes, once vibrant with life, were dulled now, wary and haunted. Tom had seen too many, like Nate, fall through the cracks. That's why, when Nate had returned last year, lost and angry, Tom hadn't arrested him for the bar fights or the petty thefts. Instead, he had offered him a hand, enrolling him in the newly founded Veterans Outreach Program, a last-ditch effort to pull men like Nate back before the darkness swallowed them whole. Now, Tom wasn't sure if that hand would be enough. Nate had been doing better lately, holding down part-time work at the lumber yard, attending therapy sessions at the community center led by Sarah Miles, a soft-spoken counselor in her late 40s with kind eyes and a steel spine, forged by years battling addiction herself. Sarah, tall and wiry, carried an air of quiet resilience, her once dark hair now heavily streaked with gray, a badge she wore without shame. Her firm but compassionate guidance had given men like Nate a sliver of hope. But hope could be fragile when men like Wyatt Cole came knocking. Standing at his office window, Tom watched as Nate walked across the square, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jeans. Head down, Nate's movements were stiff, wary a man bracing himself against invisible winds. Tom could see the temptation pulling at him already. The easy camaraderie of Wyatt's gang, the promise of belonging, of forgetting even for a little while. Tom set his coffee cup down with a heavy clink. He would not lose Nate, he would not lose this town. Behind him, Mason spoke, his voice low. "If we don't act fast, Sheriff, they're going to sink their hooks in deep." Tom turned his expression hardening into resolve. "We'll act," he said. "We start with the vulnerable. We remind them they're not alone. That night, a meeting was held at the old town hall. Word had been quietly spread through phone calls, church bulletins, and handwritten notes slipped into mailboxes. Families, veterans, and concerned citizens filled the rows of aging wooden chairs. The room buzzed with a low undercurrent of fear and determination. Tom stood before them, his uniform neat but worn, his voice steady. He spoke not of violence or retaliation, but of unity, of resilience, of fighting back, not with fists, but with strength of heart. "We are Maple Hollow," he said. "We don't bow to fear. We protect each other. We lift each other up." In the back of the hall, Nate leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching silently. Somewhere, deep inside, a flicker of warmth stirred, faint but stubborn. The kind of warmth he thought he'd lost forever. Outside, the autumn wind howled through the streets, rattling the windows and stirring the fallen leaves into restless dances. But within the town hall, for one night at least, the people of Maple Hollow stood together, their hearts steeled against the shadows gathering at their door. And for the first time in a long while, Tom Brooks allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could weather the storm to come. Morning broke over Maple Hollow in a hush of silver mist. The streets glazed in dew, and the maple leaves slick against the sidewalks. The town still slept, wrapped in the gentle embrace of autumn, as if trying to hold on to its innocence a few moments longer before the day's realities intruded. In the Brooks kitchen life, unfolded with the quiet rhythm of old habits, Laura moved about in her faded blue sweater and jeans, hair caught up loosely at the nape of her neck, her slender figure moving with the efficient care of a woman long practiced at balancing homework and quiet worry. Her green eyes, so often soft, held a flicker of concern as she watched Emma, barely 8 years old, stood at the door. Her light brown braid draped over one small shoulder, her lavender hoodie oversized and comforting. She clutched a simple canvas tote against her chest like a shield, her gray-blue eyes wide with hope. "Please, Daddy." Emma said, her voice determined, but not pleading. "I can do it. Charlie will be with me." Tom Brooks, still in his sheriff's khaki uniform, regarded his daughter from behind his coffee mug. Lines of doubt creased his weathered face, his salt-and-pepper hair still damp from an early shower. He had seen enough of the world to know it could turn cruel without warning, and though Maple Hollow was still safer than most places, the unease spreading through the town was undeniable. He glanced at Laura, who gave a small bracing nod. Then he looked down at Charlie. Charlie, the golden retriever who had come into their lives like a steady beacon, sat calmly at Emma's side. His thick, honey-colored coat glowed in the soft kitchen light, his amber eyes full of patient intelligence. Though only 4 years old, Charlie carried himself with the gravity of an old soul, a quiet strength forged in another life, as a therapy companion for soldiers who had lost too much. Tom sighed and set his coffee down. "Straight to Willow Mart and back," he said. "Stay on the sidewalk, keep Charlie close, and keep the whistle handy." Emma beamed, clutching the bright yellow whistle as if it were a medal of honor. She fastened the leash onto Charlie's collar, and together they stepped into the misty morning. The streets of Maple Hollow lay peaceful beneath the slow swirl of fog. Mrs. Dunbar, wrapped in a heavy shawl, tended her rose bushes with slow, careful movements. Mr. Halverson stood on a ladder outside the hardware store, securing faded harvest banners against the growing chill. Familiar faces, familiar places, all part of the landscape. Emma trusted. Charlie walked in easy stride beside her, his tail swaying lazily. Every so often his head would lift slightly, ears twitching at distant sounds, but nothing in his posture suggested anything more than mild interest. Willow Mart was a small square building at the end of Maple Street, its windows cluttered with festive displays of pumpkins, hay bales, and autumn wreaths. Inside April. Jenkins, with her wild halo of red curls and sunny smile, waved Emma toward the counter. "Morning, sweet pea," she said, slipping Charlie a treat as Emma gathered her items, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a jar of peanut butter. Transaction complete. Emma stepped back into the brightening morning, her tote snug under one arm. Charlie's leash looped firmly in her other hand. They retraced their steps through the soft mist, Charlie padding faithfully at her side. Emma counted her footsteps, her lips moving silently as she kept track of cracks in the sidewalk, a small ritual that calmed her racing thoughts. They had just passed the boarded-up ice cream parlor when a sound rumbled into existence, deep, mechanical, unnatural, against the sleepy quiet of the town. Motorcycles. Emma's steps faltered. She tightened her grip on the leash instinctively, glancing up to see the machines emerge from the fog like wraiths, 4 riders clad in black leather and steel engines snarling like beasts. At the front rode Wyatt Cole. He was a heavy-set man, thickly built with a wide chest and arms like tree trunks, his black beard streaked with gray, his jacket bearing the grim emblem of the Iron Vultures, a skeletal bird in mid-dive. Behind him loomed Jesse Skull. Vance, massive and bald tattoos swirling over thick muscles like snakes under his skin. 2 others flanked them, leaner but no less menacing, their eyes hidden behind mirrored visors. Without hesitation, they swept their bikes across the narrow street blocking Emma's path home. The roar of the engines vibrated through the soles of her shoes, through the strap of the tote against her shoulder, through the leash wound around her small fingers. The paper bag crinkled softly against her chest as she drew it closer. Charlie slowed, matching her uncertainty, but remained calm. His golden coat shimmering faintly in the thinning mist, Wyatt's head tilted slightly to one side as he surveyed the scene. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Behind him, Skull leaned forward on his handlebars, his tattooed arms flexing, his dark eyes gleaming with something that made Emma's stomach twist into a hard, cold knot. The world seemed to narrow around her, the morning mist closing in the space between her and home, stretching impossibly far. She stopped walking, standing perfectly still, Charlie planted solidly by her side. The Iron Vultures idled before her engines, throbbing a wall of metal and noise that cut her off from everything familiar, everything safe. The paper bag slipped slightly in her grasp. Charlie shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, his body brushing lightly against her leg, but he made no sound. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, her breathing quick and shallow. She could feel the whistle in her pocket, cold and heavy, but her hands remained frozen. And there, on the empty street bathed in morning mist, Emma and Charlie stood facing the unknown with the Iron Vultures barring their way forward. The mist that curled along Maple Street thickened, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Engines idled low, snarling beasts encircling their prey. Emma Brooks stood rooted to the pavement, her canvas tote pressing into her side, the leash wound tightly around her small hand. The Iron Vultures blocked the road ahead, a wall of chrome and leather and mirrored sunglasses. Wyatt Cole, thick and broad as a fallen oak, sat astride his Harley, with an almost lazy menace, his scarred black boots planted firmly on the ground. Beside him loomed Jesse Skull, Vance hulking, and tattooed the other 2 bikers hovering like shadows at the flanks. Their jackets bore the skeletal vulture insignia, the mark of something rotten, clawing at the heart of Maple Hollow. Emma could barely breathe. The fog seemed to thicken around her chest, making every breath a labor. Her heart pounded in her ears so loud she almost didn't hear the words echo from the dark vault of her memory. If you're scared, if you can't run, trust Charlie. Give him the signal. Her father's voice steady and certain, guiding her like a distant lighthouse. Emma wet her lips and whispered, Guard. Charlie Golden, and solid at her side, changed in an instant. His relaxed posture shifted. His head lowered. His body tightened, and from deep within his chest came a low, vibrating growl that rumbled through the leash and into Emma's bones. It was not the loud, flashy bark of an alarmed house pet. It was the cold, deliberate warning of a professional protector. Wyatt's posture changed too. He straightened slightly, his easy smirk fading into something harder. He swung one leg off his bike with slow, deliberate menace, boots crunching against the pavement. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. You're not in control here, little girl. Charlie growled again, louder this time, the sound wrapping around them like a coiled spring ready to snap. His body was a wall between Emma and the men, his muscles tight under his thick honey-gold fur. From the shadowed mouth of a nearby alley, unseen by Emma, another set of eyes watched. Nate Cooper leaned against the cold brick fists, clenching and unclenching at his sides. He wore a battered gray hoodie under a worn denim jacket, jeans scuffed from too many nights spent wandering between places. He never quite belonged. His blond hair stuck damply to his forehead, and his sharp green eyes clouded with old war memories locked onto the scene before him. He hadn't planned to ride with Wyatt this morning. He hadn't even planned to stay in Maple Hollow this long. But old debts and bad decisions had a way of tangling around his ankles like iron chains. Now, staring at the little girl facing down Wyatt Cole with only a dog and a paper bag for protection, Nate felt those chains snapping one by one. Memories surged, the cries of children from burned-out villages, the numb helplessness of being too late, the taste of dust and regret thick in his throat. He could move now. Step out, say something. Draw the attention onto himself. Buy her a chance, but his feet remained frozen to the ground. The growl from Charlie deepened again, a steady warning, and Wyatt cocked his head, slightly calculating. "That's a real fine dog you got there, sweetheart," Wyatt said. Finally, his voice low, almost friendly. Almost, bet he's tough too, but even tough things break if you press hard enough. Skull chuckled a rough, ugly sound that scraped at the edges of the mist. The other bikers shifted restlessly, their boots scuffing the ground, their hands flexing loosely. Charlie didn't flinch. His golden body trembled slightly with tension, but he held his ground. His eyes locked onto Wyatt's. Emma felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. The paper bag sagging in her arms, the cold sweat prickling at the back of her neck. The invisible line drawn between her and them, a line Charlie guarded with every fiber of his being. In the alley, Nate's nails dug into his palms. His breathing was shallow, sharp. He could almost hear his old commanding officer's voice in his head. Inaction kills faster than bullets. But still, he hesitated. Wyatt was no fool. One wrong move could turn this from a standoff into a disaster. The mist muffled everything. The thrum of engines, the tension coiling tighter and tighter. The world closing down to just Emma, Charlie, and the iron vultures. No one moved. Charlie's growl vibrated through the street like a living thing. Nate squeezed his eyes shut for half a second, then opened them again. His feet remained planted in the shadows. His conscience burned against his ribs like a brand. The stalemate stretched thinner, sharper, poised on the edge of something inevitable. Above them, a crow wheeled through the mist, its harsh cry slicing the silence. Charlie braced Emma's knuckles, whitened on the leash, and Wyatt took a slow, deliberate step forward. The fog clung to Maple Street like a living thing swallowing sound, blurring outlines, making every breath feel weighted. Emma Brooks stood frozen in its midst. Charlie pressed firm against her leg, the leash wrapped so tightly around her small hand that her fingers ached. Before them, the iron vultures loomed, their bikes idling like mechanical beasts, their riders still and watchful. Wyatt Cole took another slow step forward. His boots scraped against the gravel, the sound sharp and deliberate. He wore a battered leather jacket, the skeletal vulture insignia spread wide across his broad back. His face was rough-hewn, weathered by years of anger and bitterness, and his dark eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating behind mirrored sunglasses, now pushed up onto his forehead. Emma's breath hitched. She clutched the yellow whistle in her pocket but hesitated. Fear rooted her feet to the ground. Charlie's low growl vibrated through her body, a reminder that she was not alone. In the alley's shadow, Nate. Cooper gritted his teeth so hard his jaw ached. His tall, wiry frame was tense with indecision. His green eyes, usually shuttered and guarded, now burned with conflict. His denim jacket clung damply to his shoulders, his combat boots planted firmly on cracked pavement. He had been many things, a soldier, a brother, a failure. For months, after returning from the sand-choked wars, he had drifted, aimless and angry. Joining the Iron Vultures had been easy, too easy. They offered belonging without asking for honesty. But this moment, this girl, this dog standing against men who should have known better, cut through the haze of excuses he had wrapped around himself. Wyatt extended a hand, fingers spread in false camaraderie. "Come on now," he said, voice deceptively gentle. "Hand over the dog, little miss. Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt, right?" Charlie's growl deepened his muscles, trembling with restrained energy. That was the moment Nate moved. He stepped out from the shadows, hands loose but ready, his voice cutting through the mist like a blade. "Enough." The bikers turned, surprise flashing across their faces. Skull shifted first, his thick tattooed arms flexing as he half rose from his bike. The other two mirrored his tension, a pack sensing a challenge. Wyatt's mouth twisted into a snarl. "Stay out of this, Nate," he barked. "You don't get to play hero. I'm not playing." Nate said, his voice low but steady. "You want to fight, you come through me first." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Charlie barked a sharp singular sound that shattered the fragile silence. Emma jerked in place, instinct snapping her into action. She yanked the whistle from her pocket and blew 3 sharp bursts that pierced the mist and echoed down Maple Street. Wyatt cursed viciously, his face contorting with rage. "You stupid little—" he growled, lunging forward. Charlie sprang into motion, golden muscles rippling. He positioned himself directly between Emma and Wyatt, barking again, this time a deep, commanding blast that made even Skull hesitate. Wyatt hesitated only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Nate moved fast, tackling Wyatt from the side with the force of a man who had spent a lifetime fighting for survival. The two men crashed to the ground, a tangle of fists and snarls. The other bikers surged forward, but Charlie didn't retreat. He bared his teeth, issuing a warning so primal that even hardened criminals hesitated. Emma stumbled back against the storefront behind her, clutching the leash, the whistle dangling from her wrist. She watched with wide, terrified eyes as Nate and Wyatt grappled on the ground, neither yielding an inch. Sirens. They came first as a whisper, then a howl splitting through the fog with the promise of salvation or escalation. From the corner of Main and Maple, Sheriff Tom Brooks' cruiser appeared, headlights slicing twin tunnels through the mist. Red and blue lights flashed wildly against the gray world, illuminating every detail. The struggling men, the snarling dog, the frozen girl. Sheriff Brooks hit the brakes so hard the cruiser fishtailed slightly on the wet leaves. In an instant he was out of the car, weapon drawn, shouting commands that echoed through the street. "Hands where I can see them! Step away!" Behind him, Deputy Sarah Whitman leapt from the second patrol car, her hand firm on her service weapon. Sarah, tall and willowy with tightly braided blonde hair, had the kind of cool-focused demeanor forged from growing up with 3 brothers and surviving a bitter divorce. Her gray eyes swept the scene with clinical efficiency. Already assessing threats, Skull cursed under his breath, but raised his hands, stepping back from his bike. The other 2 hesitated a moment longer before following suit. Only Wyatt resisted grappling with Nate in a tangle of rage and betrayal. Nate managed to wrench free, shoving Wyatt hard onto his back, then raising his hands high as Sheriff Brooks bore down. "Stand down!" Brooks roared. Wyatt froze, chest heaving, his face twisted in hate. For a moment it looked as if he might reach for the knife strapped to his belt, but then he saw Charlie standing rigid over Emma, baring gleaming teeth, and beyond that the black muzzle of Tom Brooks' pistol unwaveringly aimed at him. Wyatt's hands slowly rose into the air. Sarah moved swiftly, securing the bikers one by one with smooth, practiced motions. Nate stayed where he was, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut at his temple, his green eyes dull with exhaustion and something else, relief. Tom Brooks reached Emma in 2 strides, falling to one knee beside her. "Baby, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emma shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak, but she threw her arms around his neck with a strangled sob. Charlie leaned into them both, his tail wagging weakly, sensing that for now the danger had passed. Nate watched from a few paces away, wiping blood from his brow, unsure whether he belonged in this picture of relief. Tom's eyes found him over Emma's shoulder. They stared at each other for a long moment, an unspoken recognition passing between 2 men who had seen too much and regretted even more. Tom gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Nate released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and around them, as the sun began burning away the mist, Maple Hollow exhaled too, its heart bruised but still beating. The low hum of fluorescent lights filled the corridors of Maple Hollow Medical Center, a stark contrast to the uneasy silence settling over the waiting room. Sheriff Tom Brooks paced in slow, restless circuits near the front desk. His broad-shouldered frame tensed the lines on his weathered face deeper than usual. His khaki uniform, usually crisp and neat, was rumpled from the morning's chaos. His sharp gray eyes flicked repeatedly toward the entrance as if willing everything to stay normal, safe. Emma sat curled on a plastic chair, her hands buried in the golden fur of Charlie, who lay at her feet. The golden retriever rested with quiet vigilance, his chest rising and falling steadily, though one ear twitched now and then at distant sounds. His thick coat, once pristine, bore faint smudges of dirt and blood from the earlier encounter. Yet his posture remained proud alert, a sentinel still on duty. Across the room, Nate Cooper leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his denim jacket torn at the sleeve, blood from a shallow cut drying at his temple. His lean frame was taut with tension, his green eyes dark and unreadable. Though allowed to stay by an unspoken truce, he knew he was under scrutiny. Redemption, he understood, wasn't given, it had to be earned. Deputy Sarah Whitman stood near the reception desk, murmuring into her radio. Her tall, athletic build cut a sharp figure against the sterile backdrop, her blonde braid swinging slightly as she moved. Sarah's composed demeanor masked the relentless fire that had been tempered through years of hardship. Losing a brother in the line of duty had left her guarded, yet fiercely loyal to those she chose to trust. Tom glanced at his watch again. Reinforcements were due any minute. Wyatt, Cole, and his men had been temporarily subdued, but deep down, Tom knew Wyatt wouldn't let humiliation stand. Men like him didn't forgive. They came back harder, meaner, and Wyatt was already moving. A black van tore into the hospital's emergency entrance with a screech of rubber on asphalt, the blast of broken glass echoing through the halls as the doors were rammed open. Chaos erupted. Tom barked into his radio for backup, drawing his weapon in the same fluid motion. Sarah reacted just as fast, her pistol clearing her holster before her boots even hit the floor. From the van, Wyatt Cole emerged bloodied but unbowed. His black leather jacket was torn at the sleeve, exposing the tattoos winding up his thick arms. His face twisted into a grimace of pure hatred as he hefted a heavy crowbar in one hand, a pistol tucked in his waistband. Behind him stumbled Skull, and two others, faces masked with bandanas, weapons in hand. "They're after the evidence room." Sarah's snapped eyes flashing. "The drugs seized from last month's bust. Wyatt's trying to destroy it." Tom nodded grimly. "And he's using any hostage he can get." Gunfire cracked down the hallway. Nurses screamed. Patients shouted in confusion. Charlie jerked to his feet, teeth bared in a low, growling snarl. "Stay low." Tom barked at Emma, forcing her behind a heavy oak bench, shielding her small frame. "Don't move unless I say." Charlie didn't need telling. He positioned himself over Emma, a living shield. Nate hesitated only a second before springing into motion, instincts roaring back to life. He darted toward the side hallway, moving low and fast, disappearing into the fray with a purpose that surprised even himself. Wyatt and his men surged toward the main ward, smashing equipment, overturning carts, searching. Tom and Sarah moved to intercept weapons, drawn voices ringing clear and sharp, with commands that went unanswered. Emma crouched, heart thundering, clutching Charlie's collar. The hospital, once a place of healing, had become a battlefield. Through the chaos, a figure broke away from the attacking group, a wiry man with a scar running from his ear to the corner of his mouth. He spotted Emma hiding near the bench and veered toward her, brandishing a knife. Charlie reacted first. With a snarl that ripped through the noise, the golden retriever lunged, throwing his weight against the man's knees. The scarred thug stumbled, but his blade flashed downward in reflex. Emma screamed. Charlie yelped a terrible raw sound as the knife slashed along his side, carving deep through the thick golden fur. Blood splattered across the white tiles. But Charlie didn't retreat. He planted himself between Emma and the attacker, snarling with feral ferocity. From the corner of her eye, Sarah caught the movement. Without hesitation, she fired a single precise shot. The attacker crumpled the knife, clattering to the floor. Emma sobbed, clutching Charlie's bleeding body as he sagged against her. His tail gave a faint, stubborn thump, as if telling her it wasn't over yet. "Medic," Sarah shouted, voice sharp with urgency. Meanwhile, deeper in the hospital, Nate cornered Wyatt near the evidence room. The corridor was narrow, cluttered with supply carts and abandoned wheelchairs. Wyatt, crowbar in hand, grinned like a wounded animal. "You should have stayed in your hole, soldier boy." Wyatt growled. Nate's fists clenched. "Not this time." Wyatt swung first, the heavy crowbar whistling through the air. Nate ducked, shoulder-rolling into Wyatt's chest. They grappled, crashing into the walls, fists and elbows flying. Wyatt fought dirty, cheap shots, headbutts, knees to the gut, but Nate fought like a man who had decided he wouldn't lose again. At the critical moment, Tom and two backup officers rounded the corner. "Freeze." Tom barked. Wyatt, blood streaming from a split lip, hesitated just long enough. Nate ripped the crowbar from his hands and threw it, skidding across the floor. Wyatt lunged for it. Too slow. Tom tackled him hard, pinning him to the ground. Handcuffs clicked into place. Wyatt's furious roars echoed uselessly down the hall. "It's over." Tom set his voice cold with finality. Nate slumped against the wall, breathing hard, the adrenaline draining from his system. He caught Tom's eye, and this time there was no mistrust, only gratitude. Outside in the waiting room, Sarah knelt by Charlie, pressing gauze to the deep gash while murmuring calm words. Emma sobbed quietly, stroking Charlie's head. "You did, good boy," Sarah whispered. "Real good." Paramedics stormed in moments later, taking over the triage. Tom rushed to them, gathering Emma into his arms as the EMTs wheeled Charlie toward emergency surgery. Emma pressed her tear-streaked face against Tom's chest, her voice trembling. "He saved me, Daddy. He didn't even think he'd just saved me." Tom kissed the top of her head, his throat thick. "I know, sweetheart. I know." And as they stood together amidst the wreckage of violence and chaos, the people of Maple Hollow knew, too, that in their darkest hour it wasn't just the badges and the guns that stood between them and ruin. It was loyalty. It was courage. It was a wounded golden retriever refusing to abandon the child he loved. The Maple Hollow Animal Clinic sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building framed by towering oaks whose gnarled branches rattled softly in the cool autumn breeze. The night wrapped itself around the town in a heavy cloak, and the glow from the clinic's windows seemed the only light pushing back against the darkness. Inside, Dr. Hannah Lewis moved with tireless focus. A petite woman in her mid-30s with cropped chestnut hair and wire-framed glasses, Hannah carried the quiet resilience of someone who had chosen a life of mending the broken years of caring for wounded animals, had left her with strong hands and a calm voice that could soothe even the most frightened patient. Her navy scrubs were already splattered with blood, and her brow glistened with sweat, but she showed no sign of slowing down. Charlie lay on the operating table, his honey-colored fur shaved away in patches to reveal the ugly gash slashed along his ribs. His breathing was shallow, his body trembling occasionally under the anesthesia. A small team of veterinary technicians, including young, freckled-faced Alex Monroe, moved in precise rhythm around him, passing instruments and monitoring vital signs. "We've stabilized the bleeding, but he's still critical." Hannah said, her voice low but firm. "We need to repair the muscle damage before infection sets in." Alex nodded, his pale face tight with concentration as he adjusted the IV line. In the waiting room, Emma Brooks sat curled in a plastic chair, knees pulled tight to her chest. She wore an oversized sweatshirt that dwarfed her small frame. Her light brown hair, a tangled mess around her tear-streaked face. Tom Brooks sat beside her, one arm protectively around her shoulders. Though he looked as battered as she did, his khaki uniform stained his face drawn and weary. Across from them, Nate Cooper sat hunched over elbows on his knees, his denim jacket folded neatly in his lap. His hands were still streaked with old blood, and a deep purple bruise had bloomed along his jaw. He stared at the floor, his green eyes empty, hollowed out by guilt. The clinic's old clock ticked loudly on the wall each second, stretching unbearably longer than the last. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Hannah Lewis pushed through the swinging doors, pulling off her bloody gloves. She looked tired, but there was a flicker of hope in her brown eyes. "He's alive," she said simply. Emma sprang from her chair, colliding into her father's side with a sob of relief. "We've repaired the torn muscles," Hannah continued, "and flushed the wound thoroughly. There's still a risk of infection, and his mobility will be limited for a while. But if he makes it through the next 24 hours, his chances are good." "Can I see him?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Hannah knelt so she was eye level with the little girl. "He's very tired, sweetie, but I think he'd like that." Tom squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. "Go ahead, Charlie needs you. Now." Emma nodded and followed Hannah into the recovery room, her small feet silent on the tile floor. Charlie lay on a thick padded mat hooked to IV lines, and monitors his body dwarfed by the machinery surrounding him. His golden fur looked faded under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the thick bandages wrapping his torso made him seem smaller, somehow more fragile. Emma knelt carefully beside him. She placed her hand on his head, her fingers brushing lightly over his soft ears. "I'm here, Charlie," she whispered. "You did so good. You're the bravest dog in the world." Charlie's tail gave the faintest wag, a tiny flicker of movement that broke Hannah's professional composure for a heartbeat. She smiled, blinking quickly behind her glasses. "He's fighting," Hannah said softly. Meanwhile, across town at the Maple Hollow courthouse, Nate Cooper faced his own reckoning. The courtroom was a small utilitarian space, wooden benches, a raised judge's platform, and the faint smell of old books and coffee. Judge Margaret Avery presided, a stern woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. District Attorney Caroline Dean, a brisk woman in a navy pantsuit with a reputation for being both fair and unrelenting, stood to Nate's right. Her expression was neutral, her arms folded. Nate stood alone at the defense table, wearing clean jeans and a borrowed blazer that hung a little too loose on his lean frame. The bruises on his face had darkened, making him look rougher than he felt. He cleared his throat and looked directly at Judge Avery. "I won't make excuses," Nate said, his voice rough but steady. "I joined the Iron Vultures because I was lost. I made bad choices. I let anger run my life. But when it came down to it, when it really mattered, I chose to protect an innocent, instead of turning away. That's who I want to be." He paused, gathering himself. "I'm asking for a second chance. Not to erase what I did, just a chance to build something better." The room fell silent. Judge Avery tapped her pen lightly against the bench, her expression inscrutable. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Cooper, based on your cooperation with law enforcement, your testimony against Wyatt Cole and the Iron Vultures, and your actions during the hospital incident, I am willing to consider alternative sentencing." She leaned forward slightly. "You will enter the Maple Hollow Community Rehabilitation Program. You will complete 2 years of probation with mandatory counseling, community service, and employment. If you fail at any point, you will serve the full sentence originally proposed. Do you understand?" Nate exhaled slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." Caroline Dean nodded, once approvingly, as if a small battle had been won. As the gavel struck, Nate felt a strange lightness settle in his chest. Not absolution, but the beginning of something close. Later that night, Nate walked the quiet streets of Maple Hollow alone. He passed the dim windows of the animal clinic, the soft glow inside a beacon in the dark. He paused, hand resting on the cool glass. Inside, he could see Emma curled up beside Charlie's bed, her head resting on the dog's side, the monitors beeping steadily above them. Nate pressed his forehead against the glass and whispered into the night. "Hang in there, buddy. You're tougher than all of us." And as the stars wheeled silently above in a town still mending from its scars, the long night of revival stretched onward, fragile, painful, but full of the stubborn light of hope. Morning light spilled gently over the hills of Maple Hollow, washing the town in gold and soft pink hues. The oaks that lined Main Street shimmered under the dew, their fiery autumn leaves creating a quilt of color on the sidewalks. It was a morning that smelled of second chances and quiet promises kept. At the Brooks farmhouse just outside town, Charlie stood on 3 solid legs and one carefully bandaged hind leg surveying his kingdom. His thick, honey-colored coat had regained its luster, and though he moved a little more slowly than before, the light in his amber eyes was as strong and steady as ever. His tail wagged lazily as he watched Emma bounce down the porch steps toward him, a bright flash of lavender hoodie and laughter. Emma, now more confident, her light brown hair neatly braided down her back, carried a canvas tote full of colorful flyers. Her gray-blue eyes shone with purpose. She knelt beside Charlie, slipping a gentle hand under his collar. "Ready to change the world, boy," she whispered. Charlie responded with a soft bark and a thump of his tail against the porch rail. Inside the house, Tom Brooks adjusted the collar of his deputy uniform, a deep navy, now freshly ironed, and bearing a new patch, Paws of Hope Volunteer. Though he still served as sheriff part-time, Tom had found new fire in helping build something lasting out of the pain they had survived. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed shorter, and a lighter energy clung to him. Now a man learning to breathe easier after so many years of holding his breath. Laura Brooks bustled in the kitchen, slim and steady as ever, her green eyes softer these days, worry lines fading with every hopeful day that passed. She wore a simple green dress today, her hair tied loosely at the nape flower, dusting her hands from the tray of cinnamon rolls she was preparing for the open house later. At the center of it all stood the freshly painted barn across the back field, its red siding gleaming against the autumn sky. The hand-carved wooden sign above the wide double doors read, Paws of Hope. Healing through connection. Today was the grand opening inside the barn. Nate Cooper adjusted the wide canvas harness on a sturdy Labrador named Scout. Nate had changed in quiet, profound ways. His blonde hair neatly trimmed his worn denim replaced with khakis, and a navy polo bearing the Paws of Hope emblem. His green eyes, once shadowed, now held a steady focus, tempered by experience, but brightened by something new. Purpose. Scout wagged eagerly under Nate's skilled hands. He was a rescue from a nearby shelter. A goofy, golden-hearted dog now training to become a service companion for children with sensory processing disorders. "You're doing good, buddy," Nate murmured, his voice steady and kind. Nearby Deputy Sarah Whitman knelt beside a wiry black terrier named Daisy, helping a shy little boy in a striped sweater learn how to give the sit command. Sarah, usually all sharp edges and professionalism, had a surprising gentleness in this setting, her calm voice and steady hands guiding the boy through his nervousness. Dr. Hannah Lewis stood by the barn door, clipboard in hand, her short chestnut hair tucked behind one ear, smiling as she reviewed the day's intake forms. The clinic had partnered with Paws of Hope to offer veterinary support, and Hannah had thrown herself into the project with the same tireless dedication she gave her animal patients. The small crowd that had gathered included veterans with worn caps and careful eyes, children in colorful jackets, clinging shyly to parents' hands, and townsfolk, curious to see what this strange, beautiful thing was becoming. Tom stepped to the front, clearing his throat. "Good morning, everyone." He began, his voice carrying easily over the crisp air. "When we dreamed of Paws of Hope, it was about more than just helping dogs. It was about healing the invisible wounds, the ones you don't always see, but that change you just the same." He paused, his hand brushing lightly over Emma's shoulder as she beamed up at him. "Today, thanks to the courage of this girl, and a certain golden dog who wouldn't give up, we get to start something new." There was a ripple of warm applause. Charlie, ever the dignified presence, padded forward and sat at Tom's feet, tail thumping steadily against the ground. Emma slipped beside him, one hand resting protectively over his broad shoulders. "And," Tom added, glancing toward Nate, "thanks to those willing to step out of the shadows and build a better path. We're not just healing dogs, we're healing each other." Nate ducked his head slightly, but a small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Beside him, Scout barked once, as if approving. Throughout the day, laughter and barks filled the air. Children brushed dogs and played fetch. Veterans leaned against the fence rails, speaking quietly to each other in voices cracked by experience, but softened by the open field and golden light. In one corner, Sarah organized a therapy session for a group of teenagers, pairing them with dogs learning new tasks. Her firm but patient demeanor earned a tentative trust from even the most withdrawn kids. At the refreshment table, Laura handed out cookies and warm cider, her smile wide and easy, chatting with old friends and new faces alike. And Charlie, oh Charlie. He moved among them like a quiet ambassador, accepting head pats, offering warm snuffles to shaking hands, teaching without words that loyalty and courage could be soft as well as fierce. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden beams across the field, Emma sat cross-legged in the grass with Charlie's head in her lap. Nate approached Scout, trotting beside him. "You know," Nate said, scratching Scout behind the ears, "this little place you built, it's going to change a lot more than dogs' lives." Emma smiled shyly, brushing her hand through Charlie's fur. "We're all kind of like them, aren't we? A little broken, a little scared." Nate nodded the wind, tugging lightly at the hem of his shirt. "Yeah, but maybe with the right people and the right dogs we find a way to heal anyway." Charlie shifted, licking Emma's hand once before settling again, the steady beat of his breathing grounding them both. The stars began to prickle against the deepening sky, the town lights flickering to life one by one like tiny promises scattered across the horizon. In Maple Hollow, a town stitched together with small hopes and stubborn hearts, a new chapter had begun, not perfect but real and radiant in its imperfection. And at the center of it all, a little girl, her golden dog, and a promise that no wound was too deep to be mended, no night too long to find the dawn. In the quiet corners of life, miracles often unfold, not through grand displays of power, but through small acts of loyalty, courage, and love. Charlie's unwavering devotion, Emma's brave heart, and Nate's redemption remind us that God's hand moves gently among us, stitching broken pieces back together when we least expect it. Healing does not always come in a blinding flash. Sometimes it looks like a little girl placing her trust in a wounded dog, or a lost man choosing the light over the darkness. It is in these simple daily choices that the grace of God breathes new life into wounded souls. In our own lives, we too are given moments where we can be the hands of healing, the voice of comfort, the light in someone else's storm. When we reach out, when we forgive, when we believe that even the most broken among us are worthy of a second chance, we participate in a miracle. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Leave a comment below to tell us your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the quiet miracles around us. And join us in a prayer for all those who need healing. Write Amen in the comments if you believe that no scar is too deep for God's love to heal. May God bless each and every one of you, and may you always find the light even in the darkest nights.